It had been 4 long years since Henry Elijah's betrayal, and in that time, his life had taken unexpected turns. His career in architecture had flourished, his firm designing projects across the country, earning him both prestige and wealth. But beneath the surface, a weight pressed against his chest, a guilt that refused to fade. No matter how much success he attained, no matter how many accolades he received, the past clung to him like an unshakable shadow. His marriage to Juniper had suffered the ultimate fracture, and though time had carried him forward, it had done nothing to mend what had been broken. The betrayal was irreversible, a wound that festered despite his best efforts to ignore it. Then, on a rainy afternoon, Henry's world shattered in a way he never saw coming. Sitting in his office, reviewing plans for an ambitious new sustainable community project in Seattle, his phone buzzed. The number was unfamiliar. For a brief moment, he considered letting it go to voicemail, assuming it was yet another business inquiry. But something, a whisper of intuition, perhaps, urged him to answer. The voice on the other end was calm, professional. A lawyer. The words that followed made Henry's blood run cold. Juniper had given birth to twins. His twins. The revelation struck like a thunderbolt, leaving him breathless. The room spun, the documents on his desk blurring into meaningless patterns. His hands trembled as he tried to process the truth that had been hidden from him for 5 years. The twins, James and Jan, had been born just 9 months after his affair with Victoria Chun, the woman who had effortlessly slipped into his life when his career was just beginning to take flight. 4 years, Henry had poured himself into his work, chasing success with relentless determination. He had told himself that his past mistakes were behind him, that he had moved on. But he had never once stopped to ask what he had truly lost. That night, as the rain pounded against his window in Portland, Henry sat in his dimly lit living room, surrounded by memories that no longer felt like his own. Framed photographs of Juniper, of the life they had built together, stared back at him, silent reminders of everything he had ruined. Juniper had been his anchor, his home. She was kind, patient, and fiercely compassionate, a woman who had given him her heart without hesitation. She had been willing to fight for their love. And how had he repaid her? With deception. With betrayal. She had given him everything. And in return, he had given her nothing but heartbreak. Now, she had raised their children alone. Kept them a secret from him. And he had never suspected a thing. The weight of it all was unbearable. Henry knew he couldn't undo the past, but there was one thing he could do. He had to face her. He had to hear her side of the story, to understand the depths of her pain. But more than that, he needed to know, was there anything left to salvage? Could they rebuild the ruins of what they once had, or had the damage been too great? The next morning, he found himself standing in the one place that had always felt like theirs, Powell's books. It was here, among the towering shelves and the scent of old pages, that he and Juniper had first met. Their sanctuary, their shared escape from the chaos of the world. The memory of that day, of stolen glances and shy smiles over dog-eared novels, flickered through his mind like an old film reel. But now, as he wandered through the aisles, everything felt different. Then, he saw her. Juniper sat in a quiet corner, a book resting in her lap. The soft glow of morning light fell across her face, illuminating features that were both achingly familiar and yet somehow distant. She was still breathtaking, still the woman he had once known better than anyone. But there was something else in her expression, something guarded, something unreadable. Their eyes met, and for a moment, the world seemed to hold its breath. Years of silence stretched between them, unspoken words pressing heavily in the space they shared. Then, slowly, she closed her book and rose to her feet. She walked toward him, each step deliberate, measured. And then, finally, she spoke. Henry. His name on her lips carried the weight of all they had been, of all they had lost. Her voice was steady, but her eyes, deep, searching, were filled with something else entirely. Emotion. He swallowed hard, his heart pounding in his chest. "I think we need to talk," she said. And in that moment, Henry knew, this was it. A reckoning. A chance for truth. A chance for redemption. Henry could feel his pulse quicken as he stood there, facing Juniper. The weight of the revelation from just hours before pressed heavily between them, an invisible force neither of them could escape. He wanted to say something, anything, to bridge the chasm that had grown between them, but the words felt trapped in his throat, suffocated by the enormity of his mistakes. Juniper held his gaze, her posture rigid, her arms crossed tightly over her chest as if bracing herself against the storm of emotions threatening to consume her. There was hurt in her eyes, pain carved deep into the lines of her face, and a simmering anger that had been building for years. Then, she broke the silence, her voice steady but laced with raw emotion. "So you've known all along." Her words cut through him like a blade, sharp and merciless. "That you have children. My children. Our children." The last part was almost a whisper, as if saying it aloud made it too real, too unbearable. But it struck Henry like a physical blow. His mouth opened, but no words came. He had spent the entire night preparing for this conversation, agonizing over what he would say, how he would explain himself. Yet, standing before her now, nothing seemed enough. "You've been living a lie, Henry," Juniper continued, her voice trembling now, but her resolve unshaken. 5 years. 5 years, and I've been doing this alone. Raising them. Protecting them. Loving them. Alone. And all this time, you were out there, building your career, building a life with someone else, while completely unaware that you had a family waiting for you here. Her words hit him with brutal clarity, each syllable a reminder of how blind he had been. The guilt surged through him, drowning him in its relentless tide. He couldn't argue with her. She was right. He had been consumed by his ambition, his career, and his reckless affair with Victoria. He had spent years chasing success, oblivious to the fact that he had left behind something infinitely more valuable. "I never knew," he finally choked out, his voice barely above a whisper. "I never knew. I didn't know you had them. I didn't know they were mine." Juniper's expression hardened, her lips pressing into a tight line. "How could you not know, Henry?" Her voice rose, her frustration spilling over. "How could you live all this time believing you didn't have children? That you didn't have a family?" Henry swallowed hard, his hands trembling at his sides. He wanted to give her an answer, something that would make sense of the mess he had created, but the truth was, he had no excuse. He had never stopped to ask the questions that mattered. He had allowed himself to drift through life, letting his work and his past mistakes define him, never once looking back to see what he had left behind. "I've made so many mistakes," he admitted, his voice cracking beneath the weight of his own regret. "I can't take back what I've done, Juniper. I can't undo the pain I've caused you. But I swear to you, I'm sorry. I am so sorry." For a long moment, Juniper said nothing. She stood there, arms still crossed, her gaze distant as though she was trying to process the magnitude of his words. Finally, she spoke, her voice quieter now but no less firm. "I don't know if I can forgive you, Henry." Her eyes glistened with unshed tears. "I've spent the last 5 years protecting them. Protecting them from the truth. From the truth of who you are. And now, here you are, telling me you had no idea? That you didn't know they were your children." She shook her head. "I can't believe that." Henry took a step closer, his heart hammering in his chest. "Juniper, please," he pleaded, his voice raw. "I never wanted this. I never wanted to hurt you. I've been a fool, but I can't just walk away now. I don't know what I was thinking, but I need to make this right. I need to be a father to them. I want to be a father to them." Tears welled in her eyes, and for a fleeting moment, Henry thought she might break down right there in front of him. But she held herself together, her expression unreadable. When she spoke again, her voice was steady, but the pain still lingered beneath the surface. "Do you even know how to be a father, Henry?" she asked, her gaze unwavering. "You've spent years living in a world of your own making, pretending that nothing else mattered. That your career, your image, your ambitions, those were all that mattered. But now, you have 2 children who need you. Who deserve more than a man who just shows up when it's convenient. I don't know if I can trust you to do that." Her words cut deeper than any accusation ever could. She didn't yell, didn't scream, but the truth in her voice was enough to shatter him. Henry fought the urge to defend himself. He wanted to argue, to tell her he wasn't that man anymore. But he knew better. He knew that trust wasn't something he could demand. It was something he had destroyed, and now, it was something he would have to earn. "I want to learn," he said, his voice quiet but determined. "I want to be there for them. I know I've made mistakes, but I'm willing to do whatever it takes." I want to fix this, Juniper. I need to fix what I've broken. Juniper exhaled slowly, her shoulders rising and falling as she processed his words. She took a step back, her expression still guarded, still uncertain. But there was something else flickering in her eyes now, something fragile. Hope. Or maybe just exhaustion from carrying the burden alone for so long. Henry couldn't tell. I don't know if we can fix this, she said, her voice barely audible. I don't know if we can ever go back to the way things were. But we can try. For them. For our children. The words hung in the air between them, delicate and uncertain. Henry grasped onto them like a drowning man reaching for the surface. For the first time in years, he felt something real. Something worth fighting for. He knew it wouldn't be easy. He knew Juniper's trust, once broken, would take time to rebuild. And he wasn't sure if he could ever truly erase the hurt he had caused. But for the first time in a long time, he had something to hold on to. And he wasn't going to let it slip away again. As Henry looked at Juniper, he saw the stiffness in her posture, the pain etched into her expression. But beneath it all, there was something else, a flicker of hope, fragile yet unmistakable. He knew, in that moment, that he had to try. Not just for himself, not just for her, but for the children they had brought into the world. He had missed so much already. He couldn't afford to lose any more time. The path ahead would not be easy. It would be filled with challenges, painful reminders of the past, and uncertainty about the future. But Henry was determined. He would prove to Juniper, and to himself, that he could be the father his children deserved. That he could fight for his family, no matter what it took. The days following their confrontation were filled with silence. Conversations between them were brief, careful, as if speaking too much might shatter the delicate peace they had found. Henry reached out, but Juniper kept her distance, leaving his messages unanswered or responding with only a few words. It was clear she was still processing everything, unsure of how to move forward. But Henry couldn't stop thinking about the twins. The more he thought about them, the more he realized just how much he had missed. Their first words, their first steps, the moments that shaped who they were becoming. Juniper had been there for all of it, raising them alone, while he had been blind to their existence. One Saturday afternoon, as he sat alone in his apartment, he picked up a small photo album Juniper had given him, a collection of pictures capturing James and Jane's early years. With every page he turned, the weight of his regret grew heavier. Smiling faces stared back at him, moments frozen in time, holidays, birthdays, ordinary afternoons filled with laughter. These were memories he should have been part of. Instead, his choices had led him down a different road, one that had taken him further away from the family he should have been building. His phone buzzed, pulling him from his thoughts. A message flashed on the screen. "Juniper, we need to talk." His heart pounded. This was it. The moment he had been waiting for, and dreading. That evening, he arrived at her apartment, his pulse unsteady. When she opened the door, her face was unreadable, but something in her eyes told him that this conversation would change everything. Juniper took a deep breath before speaking. Her voice was calm, steady. "I've been thinking," she began, folding her arms across her chest. "About everything. About us. About the kids." She paused, choosing her next words carefully. "I've been carrying this burden alone for so long, Henry. I can't keep pretending everything is fine. It's not just about forgiveness. It's about trust. And right now..." She exhaled slowly. "I don't know if I can trust you again." Henry felt the weight of her words settle over him, heavier than anything he had ever carried. Guilt pressed against his chest, thick and suffocating. He opened his mouth to speak, to tell her how much he regretted everything, but she raised a hand, stopping him. "I did what I had to do to protect them," she continued, her voice firm. "They didn't deserve to grow up in the shadow of your mistakes. And I don't know if you'll ever fully understand that." Her gaze softened slightly, but there was still an edge to it. "But they are my priority. Always." Henry nodded, his throat tightening. He knew he couldn't undo the past, couldn't erase the years of hurt and distance. But what he could do, what he had to do, was prove to her that he was ready to be the father his children needed. "I don't know what the future holds for us," Juniper said, her voice quieter now, as if saying it aloud made the uncertainty all the more real. "But I need to see that you're willing to put in the effort." Not just words, Henry. Actions. You need to show me that you're not the same man who walked away from us 5 years ago. A determination Henry had never felt before surged within him. I will do whatever it takes, he said, his voice thick with emotion, to prove that I can be the father they deserve. That I can be the man you once believed in. Juniper held his gaze, searching for something in his expression, some sign that he truly meant what he was saying. For the first time in a long while, there was a flicker of something in her eyes. Not trust, not yet, but something close. I hope you mean that, she said quietly. And Henry knew then that their story wasn't over. It was just beginning. The road ahead would be long and uncertain, filled with difficult conversations and painful truths. But if they were both willing to walk it, step by step, day by day, there was still hope. Hope for healing. Hope for redemption. Hope that, no matter how broken things had been, love could still find a way to survive.